Well, let's take a closer look at the booming rental market with Chris Brown joining me from California via Skype. Chris is executive editor at Auto Rental News. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Rachelle. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. So give us some context first. Compare the number of people expected to travel this summer versus last in terms of by car or flying or trains, etc.
Well, travel is coming back with a vengeance, and I would say that air travel is depressed just a little bit still. So folks are taking the road vacation, and car rental is extremely popular right now. I would say that we're probably in July will be at last year's travel demand level, or maybe a little bit higher for a rental car.
So then how has the cost comparison of renting a car versus flying and then taking a cab or an Uber when you land, how much has that changed?
Well, it's certainly going to change. It might double your rental car price. I really am not sure how Uber pricing is actually going to change. Rental car was always a very reasonable option. In some markets, it still is actually. The smaller markets, the rates are going to be extremely high. But in larger markets, it might be double the price, which is not quite what we're seeing in the news where it's $300 a day type thing.
I mean, these are really shocking prices. So then how was the rental car industry faring before the pandemic?
Well, before the pandemic, the first quarter last year of 2020 was one of the best first quarters in a couple of decades. We know what happened in March. So the rental car industry was doing pretty good before the pandemic hit.
So then how soon into the pandemic did rental car companies start sort of running into financial trouble? And what did they try and do to stay afloat?
Yeah, well, I mean, really, it was really the end of March and then through April when rental demand virtually dried up as the country stopped moving. Um, and, uh, I mean, demand went to almost zero, 10, 13, 15%. Uh, they had the luck of used car prices that shot up starting in May and through June, simply because factory production was shut down, auctions were closed, extreme supply deficiency. They stayed afloat by selling their fleets, essentially, not knowing when demand would return.
And I mean, this affected even the biggest of names. So what does a successful restructuring look like, specifically for Hertz, which ended up filing for bankruptcy last year?
Well, a successful restructuring, I mean, bankruptcy does allow you to close unprofitable locations and really, understand your cost structure, steer environment now with demand returning. And I think, the financial markets are liking the new structure of Hertz.
So now you have this increased demand. Did all of this now catch the rental car companies off guard?
Well, I'm not sure it really caught them off guard, but there was not a heck of a lot that they could do about it, frankly. I mean, the semiconductor chip shortage is a factor no one could have predicted. Believe me, the rental car companies certainly would have liked to have had more cars to fleet, but here we are managing. The rental car companies do have the ability, perhaps easier than airlines, let's say, or even cruise ships, to manage supply and demand by holding on to cars longer, to kind of try to be able to meet demand. But let's face it, summer is coming, demand is going to increase even more, and I don't see this chip shortage or this car shortage, easing up before then.
So then, given some of these challenges, then how quickly do you think they can rebuild their fleets? And what do you think is going to be the main sticking point in meeting the demand?
Well, it's really the semiconductor chip shortage, and I'm not an expert there. What I'm hearing is that it's going to be, even through to next year. So building up their fleets is really dependent on that. Um, Dipping into the used car market to fleet up, holding the cars longer is something that's going to be a fact of life. So we are seeing rental fleets with quite a lot of mileage on them, more so than they ever have. that's how they're going to manage through this at this point.
Now, with a lot of industries, we're wondering, will the pandemic lead to a rebirth of a certain industry, or will things never quite be the same, especially as other things like person-to-person car shares started popping up? What's your take for the rental industry?
Well, they were calling for the death of the car rental industry back in, let's say, 2010, when car sharing started to take hold. And lo and behold, the industry is still here. And pre-pandemic, the overall revenues in the industry in the U.S. Were topping 30 billion on a steady increase. The one thing about the pandemic is it has made the rental car, operations and rental car process more efficient, forced efficiencies through on-demand rentals and touchless rentals. These are incremental changes, but I do see that increasing, and that's really important for the rental car, business to survive and prevail. And that is a more efficient process. And I do see signs that are positive in that direction.